Welcome, everyone, to our first edition, our first episode of Inside the Mediation Room with Michael and Karen Aurit. Woohoo! Cue applause. We've got a live studio audience, not your everyday podcast. We've got a live studio audience from around the world, and we have, as our first guest, our mediation hero. He has been called the Mr. Miyagi of mediation. He has been called Mediation Yoda. Also known to be called the all-powerful and knowing being of mediation. I call him those things. I'm not sure if anyone else actually has ever called him those things. They should. We have Don Saposnek with us today. Don is a clinical psychologist, a child custody and family mediator, a national and international trainer and consultant in child psychology since 1977. He has written the classic text, Mediating Child Custody Disputes. Karen, boy, we've read this a few times, huh?
Oh, absolutely. We read it so many times, Michael, that we had to each buy our own copies because we were fighting over it.
Yeah. This has gotten its use. It is highlighted. It is note. There is a plethora of notes. Don has also taught psychology on faculty at UC Santa Cruz for 41 years, as well as teaching at Pepperdine University School of Law. Karen, oh my goodness, we're interviewing Don Saposnek on our podcast.
And I want to take a moment just to thank everybody who's here today. Thank you all. We've had a great turnout, and I see some of your names, very established mediators here with us today, and all coming to find out more about what goes on inside of the mediation room, and especially to see you, Don. So thank you to everybody joining us and taking time out of your day today to be here. We appreciate you.
We've got to just jump right into it, Karen, because there has been a question on our minds. We have wanted to ask Don this question for a long time. It's really and truly, I think, of all the questions, the question that everyone wants to know. And before we really dig inside the mediation room, we must address, you know what we need to address, Karen. Karen, what is it? What is that question that we need to ask Don?
Well, we are dying to know, Don, before beginning, what is your favorite childhood cereal?
Oh my gosh. It has to be oatmeal.
Is that even a cereal?
Oh my goodness.
What would you think? It's a steak?
I thought he was going to say Fruit Loops.
Come on, Don. Oatmeal?
Wait a minute.
Oatmeal.
Before we go into that, I think everybody needs to reflect on what today is. Today is called Tuesday, TWOS. And it's 2222. And it's an auspicious day. And later, after this podcast, go look it up on Google. Tuesday, TWO.
Don, thank you for distracting us.
Numerologists are going nuts on this day.
The Tuesday.
22.
22. I see lots of twos. There are lots of twos.
This is Don's primary strategy, distraction.
This, whoa, I didn't see that we had royalty in the inside the mediation room with us. Wow, Jim Malamed. Wow, I wish I had an applause button right now that I could hit. Jim Malamed is with us in the live studio audience. Jim, chime in anytime. You will get your turn and we will ask you the serial question that, wow, we that really explains a lot, Don. I just want to say, hey, let's get started. Let's get started. It's just amazing that we have you here, Don. And we want to start. We want to start with kind of getting into your beliefs, getting into your attitudes as a mediator. Karen, where do we begin?
I really want to know what brought you to mediation and what makes you passionate after so many years of being a mediator. What keeps you going year after year?
Yeah.
What brought me to mediation was a curiosity about how couples work with each other and how couples don't work with each other. And I had been doing couples therapy for about 7 years. And about 1977, I marked my first mediation where I got a couple who were getting divorced and worked out a custody plan. I didn't know anything about custody or plans or anything at that point. I just knew that I could work with couples pretty effectively. And so I worked it out and they came up with an agreement. And if I hadn't done that, they would be in a court hearing, a full trial, as almost all cases were. So what's kept me going? I continue being curious. It's my favorite word, curiosity. And I think without curiosity, there's no point in even embarking on anything intervening with people, because people are way too complex to know them. And the only way to navigate whatever you're doing with them is to be curious and keep exploring and keep discovering every second, every minute with them of what you can learn about them. And the more that you learn, the more effective you're going to be doing whatever you're doing. You can't tell somebody, be curious. I mean, you can make them aware of it, but curious people are curious people and incurious people are incurious people, but they can at least consider it as a strategy, if nothing else. For me, it's hardwired. I'm curious about everything all the time, and particularly about people, which is why I chose people instead of carpentry, which I was going to do.
Don, how do you become a more curious person? For people who are listening and they're thinking to themselves, well, I don't know if I'm hardwired to be curious. I don't know if that comes naturally to me.
Well, it actually might. It might be a inborn characteristic. I think it's, I don't quote Freud very much, but Freud said that curiosity drives anxiety and anxiety drives curiosity. And it harkens back to evolutionary need to know what's around you, to explore and to figure out things so that you can survive. If you're not curious walking through a jungle, you're going to be lunch to some predator. So I think it probably is hardwired. And how do you make it bigger in somebody? I think it's just levels of awareness. Keep pointing it out. And I think some people lose curiosity from childhood traumas. I think if their parents tell them to shut up all the time and don't ask questions and don't be, which is a message that a lot of kids get, then you lose your curiosity because it's more adaptive to not be curious. But in the mediation room, you've got to be curious because there's a lot of stuff going on. And you've got to figure out a path that you're going to choose. And curiosity motivates that path, usually towards more important variables than less important variables, because they're salient.
Yeah, I wonder if defensiveness inside the mediation room is kryptonite for the mediator, is curiosity the antidote? What do you think, John? Is that why we need to be curious and take on that attitude? Because without it, we'll just be defensive. We'll just be reactionary. We'll be triggered and act on it.
No, I think there is a correlation between those two. I think defensiveness is more appropriate or more explanatory when you're being attacked, when you personally are being attacked. In the room, curiosity is more operative when the couple are attacking each other. And you're not particularly being attacked, so you don't need to be defensive, but being curious allows you to explore, why are they attacking each other? And what are some ways that they could not attack each other? And then it brings up all the strategies that you're going to use as an intervener.
So Don, it sounds like curiosity also helps you be non-judgmental towards your clients in the room. And I see you nodding your head. And also, I heard you say that you can grow this curiosity. Would you say it's like a muscle? The more intentional you are about being curious, the more you can practice and the more automatically curious you can become?
You know, I've never even thought about curiosity till you ask me. I mean, I'm just naturally curious. I don't even think about it. I just assume people are either curious or not, or varying degrees in between. But I suppose that if you keep pointing it out, be curious when a trainee asks, what should I do? That's probably just a good question to ask. Be curious. I would also ask that of each of the parties in the room. I haven't done that, but that's an interesting idea to think about. Ask them each, be curious about the other person's reaction to you, instead of why do you think they're asking that question? It's a more generic way to get it that allows more latitude to their thinking about it.
Wow. It's interesting you say that, Don, because I absolutely have had the experience of the more aware I become of my own technique, my own strategy in the room, the more I am willing to share that with clients and actually reflect that on them more directly, and suggest that they actually approach each other in those ways. That question about curiousness and kind of reflecting that on the clients. I'll try it. You'll try it, Don?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We'll have to have a part 2 of the podcast at some point, and we'll circle back and see how we did.
I'm curious why you said that, Michael.
You get
Never
Don,
mind.
that's for the second half. You can ask us questions.
Okay.
oh, look out.
Hey, Michael, this is Jim. And
Yes,
you know,
Jim.
I wonder if one of the reasons curiosity works so well is because it has us asking questions rather than making statements, to which people are often going to agree or disagree. And then we have to deal with that resistance. So I had a quick question for Don, which is, I found my behavior as a mediator molded toward asking questions and being curious and wondering and perhaps and might, those kind of words, because anytime I was evaluative or judgmental or asking for responses to statements, I would get red lights with people. And, so as a mediator, we want to follow the green lights. And I think that it's, so I'm curious as to the extent to which you think our parties and their natural responses to either inquiry or evaluation actually shape mediator behavior over time. Have you found your behavior in the room shaped by your participants' responses to things you try, and how has that evolved?
I think that's an exact description of Aikido. It's a responsive art. You don't do anything unless something's done to you first. And when you do it, you utilize their doing as the energy to shape what you're going to do. And then where they land shapes your next move. I think it is a responsive art like that. the issue of curiosity leading to questions, I think there's two levels to that. One, you're right. Curiosity does elicit questions to ask based on what you're observing. But curiosity also, in my mind, is an ongoing back program, the back of my mind. I'm asking myself questions. Why did she do that? Why did he say that? Why did he just move his foot? Of course, I can't see the feet now on Zoom, but why did they move the way they did? Why did they give that look on their face? So I don't ask all those questions, but it certainly leads to a next set of questions to ask. So I think there's two levels to curiosity.
Wow. Speaking of questions, let's just stay with that for a moment. Curiosity leads to the questions that you're asking. Can you tell us more about that, Don? Can you tell us more about how you know what questions to ask? How you know, as you're going through your thought process, how to separate the relevant information that that clients are giving you from the irrelevant information that clients are giving you. What's your process there?
Yeah, the best example of that is when I started doing mediation in the late 70s and started making phone calls to people, which I still do. I won't see a couple unless I talk with each of them alone separately. Again, on Zoom, it's all a little bit different, but this part of it is all telephonic anyhow. So in my first phone call to each of the parties, and after I talk with one, I say, I need to speak to both of you before I can decide whether I'm going to take this case or before I can proceed, for two reasons. One, to get information from each of you and your perspectives. And secondly, to make sure the other doesn't perceive me as biased towards you because I only talk to you. Those two are important parts of it. In that phone call, 45 years ago, when I started making those phone calls, it would take about 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get the information I needed. All of you have experienced, you call up one party and they'll dump their entire story of their life, especially what that other party did to them and why they need to get custody and everything. The story is compelling. They tell bartenders, they tell their hairdressers, they tell anybody who will listen to their story. So I found that listening to their story gave two things. One, it gave me a whole lot of information. And two, it gave them a chance to vent so they didn't have to do it in the first mediation session. However, I didn't have 45 minutes to an hour to talk with people for free at that time, and currently even more. So I started listening more carefully for what's the information that I got from these people on their individual phone calls that actually makes a difference in my interventions. And I started whittling away down to 40 minutes, down to 30 minutes, down to 20 minutes. And now I can, in five minutes to 7 minutes, I can get everything I need in those phone calls and eliminate all the stuff that's irrelevant. What do I look for? I just want to know the basic structure. I mean, I've done over 5,000 mediations and I pretty much know everything that's going to ever come into me. I'm not surprised by the basic structure of these things because there's just 6 or 7 templates that come in. So I figured which template is it, and then I home in a little bit on the essentials of what I need to know. I need to know the basic structure of their marriage or relationship, how many kids there are, their ages, developmental stages of the kids, how the kids are doing at the time of hearing about the divorce, at now, how they're doing currently, how the parents have dealt with each other and the kids, and how much conflict there is, and what have they been through in terms of other procedures? Have they been to litigation? Do they have attorneys? How many? Are there two each have one, or does one have one? The imbalances of that. I want to know if they've been to mediation before, if they've been to any other method before. So those are all kind of structural things of what have they experienced so far, just in terms of the templates that exist. Then I have a handle on, okay, here's the kind of case I'm dealing with. And then the next level of questioning is Oh, I have a bunch of questions. I get a lot of information. What would the other party, when I talk with them, tell me about you? That's a great question because they won't even think that I might have already talked with the other party. But I always preempt that with, when I talk with each party alone, I have separate confidentiality. Other mediators say there are no secrets. I'll share everything with each party. I find it strategically much more useful to have separate confidentiality. Then they can tell me a whole lot of stuff that they wouldn't tell me if they thought I was going to share anything with the other party.
Well, let me jump in,
yeah.
Don. What
Yeah.
would the other party say about you? Does that tend to cause conflict? Does that tend to rise their
This is
and arise out of them? That
individual.
question that you asked, I'm fascinated by
Yeah.
it. What would the other party say about you?
It's not, there's no conflict there because I'm only talking to one person. This is in my phone call.
Mhm.
So what that generates is the reason they got married, typically. Okay, the adage of you get divorced for the same reasons you got married is just so absolutely true 99% of the time. It tells me what they're getting divorced over. This person doesn't remember me asking that question, so I can utilize it strategically in the session by eliciting the other party to say stuff like that, knowing I already know that. Mostly it puts them in a very humble position, like, hey, you're going to have some things said about you, so all the stuff you're saying about him or her, make you understand it's going to be balanced out later on. So it's sort of be on notice there's a question like this that'll be asked, or that'll be volunteered if you don't ask. And it also gives me a sense of what the other person's been up to in this marriage. So then I have some leverage to work with in the sessions. Again, these questions, because they're so anxious when they're talking to you on the phone, they don't remember that I asked those questions, that I know that about them. This is strategic thinking.
So Don,
yes.
it sounds like you have a lot of strategic questions you're asking them, and
Yeah.
over time you've gotten better and better at getting the information in less time.
Yeah.
And just reading your book, I know you talk about strategies and you also talk about techniques. Can you explain the difference between what a strategy is in the room and what a technique is?
Yeah, a strategy is an overarching concept underneath which are techniques. So a strategy is an overall game plan for a particular intervention, and strategies are the things that you say and ask and do utilizing that strategy. So an example, an example might be father comes in and does his, as Erwin, who's on the call will know, I want 50-50, the pounding of the desk. I want 50-50. Fathers almost always say that. And in the phone call, I got a better sense of what his relationship with his kids are, because I'd ask about that, how they feel about him. And I know whether the kids are close to him or not, and whether the 50-50 partially is fueled by, I really love my kids and want to be with them, versus I want to save child support, or it'll make me look like a better dad in the community if I have 50-50, or I can tell my new girlfriend that I have my kids and she'll think better of me. Who knows what? It can be any of those. So if he says I want 50-50, my strategy would be to preempt that in the first session. And the techniques under that preempting would be telling stories about fathers. It could be saying something like, I know both of you love your kids and want to spend lots of time with them. And Dad, I know that you really want to be a really good dad and spend time with your kids. And we're going to be covering that as we talk about the needs of the kids and their different developmental stages and what's feasible for younger kids and older kids, and all the research on that. We'll cover all of that. So the strategy was to preempt him from doing 50-50 in the first minute of the session. And the technique was to join him and then deflect onto other topics. Join him in his thinking that I'm going to get him 50-50, but never saying 50-50, just saying, I'm going to make sure that the kids have lots of time with each of you in the ways that kids can handle, in the ways that the research suggests, et cetera. And so I'm deflecting it as a technique from the overall strategy. How do I get this guy from demanding 50-50 so there's nothing more to negotiate? I want to give myself some leverage to negotiate up to 50-50, but never using that as the starting point, which fathers typically do.
It sounds like the strategy is the thing you're doing. You're choosing to do something to get you to your ultimate goal, and that thing that you're doing in that moment is going to help get you there. This technique is how you are, is your way of being as you're delivering that strategy. Is that accurate? Does that reflect what you're saying?
Not quite. I think more of strategies as a concept. I can name a strategy. My strategy is to prevent this guy from stopping negotiation possibilities, taking his endpoint first. And the techniques are, there's a lot of ways to get there. You can do active listening. You can say, I hear you that you want to really have half the time with your kids, but that makes it even harder. A more strategic statement like that, I can see that you really love your kids and want to spend lots of time with them. Or you could say, before we get into how we're going to do this, the schedule, I'd like to just share some information from the research that we've known for 4 longitudinal studies and over 2,000 studies of kids of divorce. We know a lot about how kids turn out over time from a divorce, different from intact households. And I want to cover all of that with both of you so that you both hear. All of those were techniques to achieve the strategy of preempting him from starting with the final closing.
Got it. You know, people are teaching this in all different ways. There's no real consensus, I think, in how people are teaching it. So Don, just normalizing, mutualizing, reframing, are these strategies or techniques?
Those are techniques.
Those are techniques. Interesting. All right, so Don, let's play.
Michael, my question to you would be, what would reframing be a strategy to do?
It could be to de-escalate conflict, to
filter the communication so that one.
But there is no conflict yet. You're just starting with reframing.
Well, if I'm in a mediation and spouse A says something derogatory about spouse B, I will reframe to potentially preempt.
No, you already have conflicts, what I'm saying. I would think a reframing is a preemptory thing before they get conflict. I mean, you can do it with both for sure. But in terms of a strategy, my strategy is to preempt conflict or to minimize or reduce conflict. And the techniques might include reframing, normalizing, etc. Those are techniques to accomplish the strategy of reducing or preventing conflict.
So you've got a lot of techniques in your playbook, Don. I know you have dozens and dozens, if not many more, that you've labeled, you've defined. Here's a question that I know many people are burning to know. If you were stranded on a desert island, you were mediating, and you could only use 3 techniques, what are the most essential techniques that you would choose to use in mediation? You can only use 3, Don.
My curiosity is, why would I be doing mediation on a stranded island?
I mean, there wouldn't be very many people to meet. Don,
I'd mediate the palm tree and the
coconut.
Right.
And the coconut.
It would be online mediation.
It would be online, of course, Jim. Thank you.
That's right.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, three of my most important strategies. Oh man.
No, techniques. You see, you've done it too, Don.
Oh, yeah.
You're getting them confused now.
Techniques. What is the strategy you want me to use?
That's a good question. Conflict reducing strategies.
Okay, so first would be preempting, always preempting. And there's a whole set of strategy, the strategy, well, it's a technique and a strategy, but as a technique, I mean, these are not mutually exclusive. I'm just labeling this because it's simpler in how I think about this stuff. But preempting is probably the most important tool that I use. I started on the phone call. I started with, who do I call back first? I started thinking, as soon as I hear there's a case, I'm already thinking, how do I preempt conflict from ensuing? And I've got a whole bunch of paths that I've learned over these decades of what's important to cover so that you don't have to be confronted with conflict. There's a lot of ways to do that. So preempting would be the most important tool. A second would be maintaining balance. We call it neutrality originally. I think it's more accurate to call it balancing. So for example, if I talk to one party, I always talk with the other. If I spend 6.5 minutes with one party, I always spend 6.5 minutes with the other, talking about the ball scores or whatever you need to talk about to just balance out the number of minutes. If I'm leaning towards one person in the chair or in the room or in the camera now, I'm also leaning equal time to the other. So that balancing act is so critical because they're just waiting to jump on you for being biased towards the other party. They're waiting for you to make a mistake like that. So that's a really critical tool to use. And a third tool, I'm using tool as a sort of generic description of both strategies and preempts because they're all tools. The third tool would probably be focusing on the children whenever they get stuck or as they're about to get stuck and going at each other. What did you tell me your kids' birthdays were? I don't know. It disrupts conflict right in its tracks. Or I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you. I didn't get where your second kid was going to school. Anything that disrupts it, or how do your kids feel about you fighting when you're fighting? Oh, they try to get us to stop. Oh, does it work? Yeah, usually it does. All right, imagine your kids are here right now. What would they say to you? Just focusing on the kids, or I want to just ask you a couple other things about your kids before we go any further. And just make up anything. I mean, it has to be relevant sounding, but just, it's a disruptive technique, focusing on the kids that can stop conflict in its tracks. And I've never had an exception where when you focus on the kids, they stop fighting. And then you can remind them why they're there. You can remind them what's most important in their life, remind them if they want to keep the conflict going, keep the divorce going. If they want to resolve all this stuff, let's finish your divorce and get on with it. You take the kids out of the middle of that.
So those are your
are,
go-to.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Those are your go-to. You said preempting conflict, whether that's maybe through education, anything you can do to lower conflict, balancing, consistently balancing in the room, and refocusing on the children. Those three, would you say, are the most common ones that you use?
Those are the most effective ones and the most important ones, not the most common.
Okay.
I mean, I always do those, but I always do a lot of other stuff too. So, but these are really, if I had to pick three, those would be three tools that gets you a lot of mileage in getting through mediation.
That's helpful. And what would you say overall, Don, what kind of attitude does a mediator need to have? What is the most important, the most essential attitude as a mediator that you need to have to be most effective with your clients?
I have to come back to curiosity again. Be curious. Because I think if you're curious, like Jim said, you're less likely to ask pointed, closed-ended questions. You're more likely to ask open-ended questions. You're more likely to observe and be aware of things going on. You're more likely to get inside their heads more accurately than making assumptions and then acting on your assumptions. It's a stance of openness. Again, back to Aikido. The Aikido master stands in front of somebody coming at him with a knife or a sword, with open arms invites them in. Come on in. Let's see what you're up to. Let's see what kind of approach you're going to try to aggress me with. Let's see what your intentions are. Be curious. If you're not curious, then you're defensive and you're blocking and you're not going to be able to utilize that energy effectively. But if you're open and curious, anything can come at you and you're prepared for it. Chip uses the metaphor that I shared with him about Aikido. He says at some point in his teaching, even doing trainings and doing mediation, doing large group work, he says he stands in the middle of the room and he feels like an Aikido warrior, that he can handle any approach from any direction, any question that comes at him. And after decades of doing mediation, he's ready for anything and he's no longer blindsided by anything. I feel that way as well, but I think it takes a level of experience of having enough attacks at you, i.e. conflictual couples, that at some point you've got all the templates down, you've got all the techniques that work for you, and now you can handle anything. There's nothing new that's going to come in that's not resolvable by the set of techniques and approaches that you've developed in your own repertoire that work, that are effective. But before you get there, it's scary because the next case that comes in, you haven't had one like that before. You didn't know that template. And you have to start figuring out what you're going to do on the spot. And that takes energy and creates defensiveness on your part because you're going to be attacked while you're thinking. But once you got to that point, you can be attacked while you're thinking or while you're not thinking because your body is just reflexively responding to the attacks because you practice them all so many times. And in mediation, the same thing. If you've got your strategies well thought out conceptually, and you've got a whole bunch of techniques that have worked for you practically, you're ready for bear. You can handle anything that comes in.
So speaking of that, John, I think everybody wants to know, handling everything that comes in, how do you personally deal with a client that you don't like, which is bound to happen probably
Great
multiple times
question.
in your career?
Great question.
I used to say to that question, try to find something that you like about the person. And in my life experience, I've always found something I like about a person. But now I'm thinking more curiosity might be the approach to take. Be curious about somebody that you don't like, and you'll discover something that you like about that person. There are people I don't like that I have to work with. And I do get defensive at times and I have to keep catching myself. Back up, relax, let it go. You don't have to finish this case. They can go if they want. Don't tangle, just don't tangle. And I have to remind myself of that because I know how to tangle. But when I tangle, I get in trouble. I just get them being defensive. So I have to back off, take a breath, remind myself to be curious at those times. Curious about me, why am I reacting to that? And curious about them, why are they doing that to me? Why are they attacking me? And then remember the understanding they're attacking me because I'm in the way of them attacking their spouse mostly. Sometimes they're attacking me because I just said something they didn't like. So yeah, it's hard, but mostly if you discover that you can like something about everybody, and I think most mediators who go into this profession know they have some capacity to like everybody, or they wouldn't do it. The trainees that I've had over the years who choose not to do it often don't have that capacity. They say, no, I don't like that person. I could not work with them and I'm done. I can't do this kind of work. I'm going to go into something easier as a profession.
Yeah, and capacity speaks to your level of self-growth and knowing that you have a background in psychology, and there are many mediators out there who do not. What would you say a mediator needs to do? What type of work, what type of self-growth would they need to do on themselves to make them an effective mediator?
I don't think in terms of self-growth. I'm not sure what the concept of growth means, except expansion. If I understand expansion, expansion of your thinking, expansion of your feelings, expansion of all that you are, I suppose that could be metaphorically called growth. But I think that people minimally have to be self-aware. I mean, if you're just a defensive person and you can't open to somebody not liking you or being angry at you, you're not going to do well in this work, because there's a lot of people that don't like you and that are going to be angry at you just because you're messing with their children, you're messing with their livelihood, you're messing with their marriage, you're messing with the very foundation of their life that gives them security. And they're going to pick words out, pick phrases out, pick conclusions that you've drawn and attack you with it because it threatens them. So my psychology background doesn't create self-growth. I mean, there are a lot of graduate programs that require you to have 2 years of therapy, personal therapy, before they'll even let you in their master's program, let alone doctoral program. Most doctoral programs don't require that, but they've assumed that you'll figure that out, whatever you need. If you've got a real troubled past and you haven't taken care of it, you're going to be a dangerous mediator or an ineffective one. If you've had a troubled past and you've taken care of it, however you do it, whether in therapy or there was some research that showed that there's a direct relationship between having 10 years of psychotherapy, intensive, deep psychotherapy, and having a spouse that's a positive spouse for 20 years, that a spouse can create the same benefits of therapy if it's a good spouse, if it's a supportive spouse, if it's an insightful spouse who gives you support and helps you clarify life along the way in vivo, instead of once a week in a therapy chair for an hour. So a good relationship is the same as good therapy. If you don't
Heard
have
that,
a good,
Michael?
Yeah.
Karen,
Big note.
Take note. This is why I married a therapist.
yeah, and that's probably a double effect, or maybe it could backfire because you're going to be analyzed all the time. I don't know.
Smart. I think it's a smart move.
Therapists are always right. That's the problem.
I've learned my lesson. I heard you say self-awareness. It was something to the effect of, I'm not sure about self-growth, but self-awareness. I wonder if that is really the key, Don. That, how can you be curious without the awareness? How are you conscious enough in the moment where you are attacked or where something is being said from one client to another, no matter what type of mediation you're practicing, if you're not able to maintain an attitude of non-judgment? How are you able to, if you're not self-aware, maintain this state of non-defensiveness? Is self-awareness, isn't that mindfulness? There's a lot of talk about mindfulness and more about mindfulness and mediation, but in the talks that I've seen, I don't really always see the direct correlation. Why do we need to know mindfulness as mediators? And I think this might hit on exactly why, because if we're not self-aware, nothing else is really possible in terms of how we need to be inside the room. Yes, Don? No, Don?
Yes, absolutely. You need to be self-aware. As a psychologist, that was my training. So it was just hardwired in from when I was 22 years old. You be self-aware, you're a clinical psychologist. And we're always reflecting that in every training, every conference, etc. Lawyers, not so much. Lawyers are not particularly trained to be self-aware. In fact, they're often trained to not be too self-aware because you got to focus on the stuff around you. That's where your attacks are going. That's where your strategies are going, to outside of yourself. I mean, I've had lots and lots and lots of lawyers in my private practice of therapy, and they do all have that in common, save for a large handful. They aren't particularly insightful or self-aware. And in fact, they're really uncomfortable with it. When you talk the touchy-feely kind of stuff that they label self-awareness is a problem as a practicing lawyer, as a mediator who comes from a law background, I think they're probably taking care of 75–80% of it just by a choice to mediate instead of litigate. That means they're likely to be largely more self-aware than litigating attorneys who don't ever think about mediation. However, there's still a 25–30% ish level of, when I'm training lawyers in mediation, people with lawyer backgrounds, it's a different background. It's a different kind of awareness than when I'm training therapists who already got the awareness down because they're therapists. That's what they do for a living, is be aware of themselves and others. So I always thought that the therapist lawyer team is the perfect model for mediation. You bring both that crisp, sharp analytic skill from the law background and the emotional, thoughtful awareness from the therapist background, and the two together tackle everything needed for a great divorce. I suppose collaborative was an attempt to do that, but it's got its own problems.
But it is possible, Don, isn't it possible if mediators were to begin to start thinking about focus? We're talking about awareness, but if mediators were to begin to think about focus and focusing on different things simultaneously, and I think that what I'm hearing you say is that a mediator is one thing to be able to focus on what's being said in front of them. And it's another thing to simultaneously be able to focus on what's happening around the mediation, how what's being said and the interaction between you and your client in that moment is affecting the other person in the room, how it's affecting the agreements that might be tentative or the future agreements that might be at play. But the third focus is really your focus on yourself, your self-awareness. If a mediator can focus on what is in front of them, that very specific focus, the open field around, and simultaneously focus on themselves, how is what is being said affecting me moment to moment to moment? How am I feeling? And process that, and in some way be somewhat detached from what's happening as it's happening, so that you can filter yourself. Do you really need to have a co-mediator in the room with you if you're able to reconcile that multi-dynamic focus?
I didn't say need to. I just said I think it's a really great model for it.
Yeah.
No, I think what you described is fine. I was talking more about the legal background and the therapeutic background in that conversation. That those are the two bodies of knowledge that mediators need to have, and most of us only have one of those bodies, and cobble together the other body. Mindfulness I see as a technique, not a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And mindfulness is teachable. And mindfulness is a way to overcome a lack of a lifelong of self-awareness by using it as a teaching tool for yourself. Yeah, you can increase your awareness. And particularly, probably people from a legal background would do better with mindfulness, because therapists do that all the time. It's not much new to us. I mean, some therapists take workshops on mindfulness to do more of it, but it's not new to them. But to lawyers, it's pretty new, to a lot of lawyers, not all. And in terms of your focus concept, again, I go back to the systemic view versus the individual view of conflict. So the individual view is there's two adults in a conflict with each other about a divorce, and they're two individuals. And from a lawyer's point of view, you just help them negotiate a deal, negotiate a settlement between these two individual adults. From a systems point of view, two people are coming into you with a whole field of people around them. They've got kids, they've got bosses, they've got friends, they've got families, they've got people in the background coaching them, they've got lawyers, they've got therapists, all with them in the room with them. And if you take an individual focus, you just see two people. If you take a systems view, you see everything around them and how they're all systemically interacting with each other. And that gives you a great deal of more information. When the Aikidoist comes into somebody attacking them, they're looking at that attack as a field of energy, and there's a whole lot of other energies around. There's a whole lot of places they can go. There are other people that could pop into the scene behind you. So your focus has to always be on the attack in front of you and all the attack potential around you, and convert them all into partners and do the dance of Aikido and resolve the conflict with nobody getting hurt. I picture mediation like that too. When people come into the room or online, I'm always, always, always thinking of all the people that are off camera. It's actually, Colin, you'll like this, it's more acute for me since I've been on Zoom for the last 2 years, that I can actually focus on these two people, and literally the metaphor takes meaning, the people off camera, because I've had the girlfriend standing right off camera coaching this guy of getting 50-50, and she slipped into the camera one time like that, and I caught her and called the question of this guy. And there's some mediators that take the camera, they make the people take the camera in their room and show everybody who's in their room or not in the room, like Colin just did. Anyhow, so always keeping that systemic view, whether you're on camera or in your mediating room, of all the people influencing these people to say what they're saying, and being aware of that all the time. While I'm reflecting on my own feelings and reactions to things so I don't get defensive, I'm staying balanced, I'm staying neutral, I'm staying attentive, I'm listening for things that are beyond the words. It's really a big practice of multi-focus, of systemic focus, all at the same time. That's the art of mediation. Getting there is the mechanics of mediation, the science of it, learning all the things that you can say, and learning the rules of conduct, and learning etiquette, and learning how you can be off camera or on camera. But ultimately, if you stay with it and you're passionate about it, it merges into a systemic view of, wow, now I know a whole lot and I can handle a whole lot more stuff coming in.
You
Go ahead.
know a whole lot now, Don. It sounds
Yeah.
like you really do. And if you could go back to your 35-year-old self, arbitrary number here, what would you tell your 35-year-old mediator self?
I would tell
Knowing what you know
myself,
now.
I would tell myself, learn family systems theory first. Understand the systemic view of human behavior. We're not individuals in this context. I mean, there are other contexts. If you're a philosopher, an existential philosopher, you're just dealing with individuals and what they experience in life. As a practitioner of people, in whatever form you do, whether it's therapy or mediation or settlement conferences, whatever, the more that you can appreciate the systems view of all the influences, the more effective you're going to be. Just hands down, that's the most important thing. Self-growth is a piece within that. Understanding individual psychology is another piece in that. But if you don't have that systems view, you'll never get to the art of mediation, because you'll be missing out 50 or more % of the data that you could be utilizing in your interventions. So I would say, at least take courses on systems thinking. Family systems theory is probably the most elegant and simple way to get into there. And it doesn't even matter what model of family systems, they use different conceptual words for the same thing, which is be aware of everything influencing an individual. Your social network, from family to friends to the community, it's all influencing you, your culture. I also think that if I had to go back to my 35-year-old self, well, make it 25 or 20-year-old, I would have taken more courses in anthropology, cultural anthropology, and sociology. I just took the required ones as an undergraduate, the required one. Well, in anthropology, there was physical and cultural, but cultural anthropology has so much to inform psychology as a field in looking at systems, and sociology, looking at groups. So getting everything we know about those outer fields beyond psychology. I'd also have probably gone to first 2 years of law school, at least. There's something about law, studied more law. I mean, I've learned a lot of it just from dealing with my colleagues, but just understanding the fundamentals of law gives you a heads up. And maybe a good way to do it is group therapy. So you get a sense of larger than one person's perspectives on any given issue. If you weren't a therapist and didn't have to do that stuff anyhow. And get really good at working with couples. If you want to be a couples mediator, maybe get some training in couples therapy. I think probably the most efficient way to get all of those pieces would be to get a master's in counseling, at least as a lawyer, get a master's in counseling. And as a counselor, I don't know what the first 2 years of law school are, if that teaches the basics or if that's fluff and the second 2 years are more important. But they should have some courses, some law courses available to people who don't want to become lawyers. I don't know if that's happening now. Michael, you would be closest to that.
Yeah, I think there may be. And to summarize, essentially, you're saying maybe be a therapist and go to therapy. That's what you would tell your younger self, and maybe that we can learn something from that. Maybe we can learn something from that. But with 3 minutes to go, Don, can you believe it? Time has just flown by, hasn't it, Don?
We were going to just do this for a half hour, weren't we?
I mean, yeah. Can you believe it's been a full hour, and now we're at the end of the hour, and gosh, we're so excited to end this way, Don. James Lipton, you all remember James Lipton, the great James Lipton from Inside the Actors Studio, ended Inside the Actors Studio with a questionnaire of 10 questions. Of course, he interviewed the best and brightest, the legends in terms of film, stage acting, performing. The questionnaire was originally asked by talk show host Bernard Pivot. And inside the mediation room, we're lucky to have you kicking our podcast off, a legend in your own right. Karen and I would like to ask you these questions, and we'd like to end.
One word answers, I think.
What? Well, it depends on the question, I suppose.
It does.
But we're going to certainly start with a one-word answer. Don, what is your favorite word?
Curiosity.
There we go. That's a
Am I
theme.
being redundant here?
What is your least favorite word?
Don't.
What turns you on?
Music, especially jazz. By the way, in the book that Colin has a chapter in, The Evolution, I forgot which of the authors describe a whole section of comparing jazz to mediation. A good thing to check on. It's on mediate.com.
Nice. What turns you off?
Oh, I am really annoyed by TV commercials.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of silence. I go.
Curious about that.
There's a forest nearby that has no chainsaws, no cars. It's just absolute silence, and it's just a delicious sound to go visit.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I hate the word fail.
What is your favorite curse word?
Holy crap. Like that one.
That's a good PG-13 one, Don. And
That's-
what profession?
Wait, that was 2 words. I'm sorry.
No worries. We'll let that one slide. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Well, I was groomed to be a concert pianist, but I gave that up at 16. I would love to be a carpenter, a really good, fine carpenter. It's so concrete and so specific and so the polar opposite of therapy and mediation, which is all in your head. And I get my head filled up every day, and I'll go and pound wood or cut firewood or build something, and it's just so satisfying.
And what profession would you not like to do?
Accounting. I'm not a fan of numbers.
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, wow. Welcome aboard. There's a lot of stuff to be curious about here.
Very nice, Don.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here, Don Saposnek, the great Don Saposnek. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been our first episode of Inside the Mediation Room with Michael and Karen Aurit.
Oh, thanks, everyone. Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,